Welcome. I'm Masood Ahmed. I'd like to welcome you to this conversation on COVID and its impact on developing countries. I'm very pleased that for our first conversation on this topic, we have with us the Minister of Finance of Ghana, Ken Ofori-Atta, who, in addition to his national responsibilities, is also the chair of the Development Committee, which is a joint committee of the IMF and World Bank, and provides guidance to those institutions. That committee will be meeting shortly in 2 weeks, and that will be an opportunity for Minister Ofori-Atta to provide guidance for those institutions as they support developing countries in dealing with the COVID crisis. So we'll have about 20 minutes for this conversation. And I want to start off first, Ken, by welcoming you and thanking you to join us for this event. And also perhaps to start a little bit with where you are in Accra and give us a sense of how Ghana is responding. I know you have taken some fiscal measures. I know you have taken some measures on monetary policy. You're undergoing a process of isolation and lockdown, and it would be great if you could give us a sense of how those are going. And in particular, I want to ask you, given the fact that the economy is structured so differently, with so many people working in the informal sector in Ghana, given the fact also that it's hard to be able to get support to shore up incomes of people who are staying at home, because you can scale up cash transfers, but how far are they reaching? I want to get a little bit your sense of how well the measures are likely to work, what else you think will be needed. So let me first ask for your thoughts on that.
Thank you very much indeed, Masood, and most kind of you to reach out to us. I hope you can hear well. As I mentioned, this is, an example of Ghanaians being ingenious about this whole problem, and therefore our seamstresses and tailors beginning to sew these masks. So at the very least, there will be some modicum of protection, and that's where we are at. But Masood, for us, I think we have maybe revenue losses of close to $2 billion, given the fall in oil prices. Then when we look at our trade business, CIFs have gone down because of just a global trade pattern. And then in looking at our corporates and all of those. So you quickly are hit with this phenomenon. But in addition to that, really, is to look at certain areas such as the hospitality industry, where the occupancy is really gone down from 70 to 20%. And therefore precipitating layoffs of over 400 or 500 workers, and that all becomes very problematic. And they have certain debts also that they have to make sure that they pay up on. So I think it's one, and given the nature of the lockdown that we are also experiencing, and a huge part of our population being informal market, who earn daily wages to support their families, clearly you have a situation where lots of people are not going to get the income they used to. We have about 24% of our population earning less than $350 a year, and that's about 7 to 8 million people. So immediately you begin to see how we should begin to address that. So there's the issue of looking about the nurturing and care of our people, and then two, how to get the corporates also functioning, and then how the republic itself can maintain. So the care and nurturing, I think the obvious thing is cash transfers, but then how long will it last? Do we then put in a program to make sure that at least there is food for people to eat, and then you can then move to another level. So food and medicine and face mask, i.e. vitamin C, food, vitamin C, and face masks become an intervention that we need to organize ourselves with. Begin to look at a stimulus for small micro SMEs is what we are venturing into. And then discussion with the banks for them to also have increased facilities and to be able to support the businesses which are much larger, and look at ways of also deferring interest payments for maybe the next 6 months or so. So that becomes sort of the bucket that we are looking for. But then the question is, with countries like ours with very little savings, how do you manage this period? As you mentioned, the Bretton Woods have come on strongly and quite rapidly. And so we are looking to take advantage of the rapid credit facility, which will be helpful, and also working with the World Bank, which has already stepped in for the preparedness package of $100 million or so. But then it brings into question this whole issue of debt sustainability and therefore what to do. Because honestly, this is an imported problem which then has come to hit us. The global architecture is such that we are all squeezed into it. And then with our little resources, we are supposed to manage to get this out of the way. So it's a very difficult period, a very trying moments for the country.
Yes. So can I just maybe ask for a little bit more your thoughts on two aspects? First, in terms of reaching the population with the support that they need, as long as the resources are there, the cash transfers. In the case of Ghana, you're relatively well structured. You can probably get quite a substantial number of people covered, but still there are many people that are not being reached through cash transfers. What other ways do you think you might apply, or is that an area in which more work by international agencies would be helpful for you?
Well, I mean, you remember I've always been advocating that maybe the most important Marshall Plan we could do for Africa is to digitalize this continent, so that we know where our people are, and then those who are also supposed to pay taxes will pay the taxes. So yes, in Ghana, I think we have a penetration rate of mobile of about 138%, meaning that some people actually have 2 or 3 phones. So truly, if we were to get into a cash transfer mode, I suspect will be north of 80% efficient. So that would be a very effective means of getting resources to everybody. But we still, technically don't know who these people are, where they are, etc. And that is going to be problematic. But maybe this is an opportunity to recalibrate and get everybody understanding, appreciating why there needs to be at least a little formal, so the state can help them in these circumstances.
And then the second thing I wanted to get into was really you raised a figure of 2 billion as the sort of revenue losses, and you might get support from the Rapid Credit Facility of the IMF. You are getting 100 million from the World Bank that you're in the process of working on. You have some bilateral loans that there's a discussion going on about whether or not those bilateral lenders, official bilateral lenders, might put a moratorium on repayments and debt servicing, at least for the coming year. And of course, your situation, Ken, is in some ways mirrored across so many countries in Africa. And I know that African finance ministers have met twice, also with the ECA, with Vera Songwe, to help. And I wanted to get a bit your sense of looking across the continent now. What is the sentiment in terms of the kinds of support that they need and the kinds of support that are on offer. And, from the numbers you gave, there's clearly a mismatch between what you need and what is currently on offer. Although the agencies are being forward-leaning, it's just not responding yet to what your needs are. And I hear the same from other colleagues across the continent. I wanted to get a little bit your assessment of Africa as a whole. What do you think will be the needs and what will be the degree of ambition on the response that is required compared to what is currently on offer?
Masood, we did in the ECA letter indicate assistance of some $100 billion and to look at a moratorium on 2 years or so of the bilateral sort of interest payments going forward. The fact of the matter is, I think we are all settling into the bitter reality that whatever it is going to take us 2 to 3 years to climb out of this. Okay. We are also quite clear, Masood, that really this is another imposition from outside, which is exacerbating, the situation we are in. I think the issue of the SDRs is important because we need to find a way to make sure that we don't default on our commercial debt. That should not happen. So we should find a way to increase SDRs or for the Europeans to offer their SDRs as a way out. My feeling is that China has to come on stronger. I think our Africa debt to China is about 145 billion or so, about 8 billion of interest required this year, 8 billion of payments required this year, about 3 billion being interest. So that needs to be looked at. It's just, an apocalyptic moment, and I don't think we seem to be taken as seriously as we should, given how the world came together after the Second World War. I think we are facing something like that. And in our really somber moments, let's think through, what it is that we have to do to change the financial architecture as it is right now. Right. So beyond all things is really saying, what can Africa do for itself? That's true. What can the world do to make sure that this continent, which could have a quarter of the world's population by 2050 and the youngest population, is ready to play its role. So yes, as DC, I'm going to really put people's feet to the fire to say that we can't pretend that these are normal times when we see the reaction from Congress and the various European capitals as to what they feel they have to do for their population. Then, by extension, it is that type of forbearance that needs to be looked at and forget the old rules for us to really survive this menace in a much better way of a more united world.
I must say that I think I agree with you entirely that, look, this is a crisis of a magnitude that most of us will not see in our lifetime in terms of its impact. Because in addition to having all the shocks that come from the outside, that were the shocks associated, for example, with the global financial crisis, you have the additional supply shock that in the countries themselves in Africa, you're going to have to deal with the shutting down of businesses, of production that comes from the epidemic and combating the epidemic. So the combination of the supply shock and the demand shock are going to make the magnitude of this both unprecedented and also quite long-lasting. Even after the financial crisis, 8 years later, African countries were still below the trend line that they were on before the crisis. And again, this is going to have a long-lasting shock. So I mean, I guess I wanted to get your sense that, there seems that there are two parts. There is an immediate response, which really has to be quick and it has to be adequate to help countries cope with the crisis and mitigate the impact, the economic impact. And then there is, as you were saying, an opportunity to rethink some of the basic issues going forward, whether it's a question of how we look at debt sustainability, whether it's a question of how we look at supply chains, whether we look at integration within Africa and between Africa and the rest of the world. So there's an opportunity to rethink many of the things that we took for granted going, in the past. And I wanted to get a little bit your, final thoughts. I know that a few minutes we have to end. In terms of, the development committee is coming up, and here's an opportunity to sort of set an agenda for the coming year for the international institutions to work on. And I wanted to get a sense from you of what are your priorities for the things that you want the World Bank and the IMF to focus on in the coming year, both in terms of the immediate response, but also in terms of beginning to look at what the post-crisis landscape needs to be shaped.
Right. Thank you. I mean, I think immediately, of course, as the issues of the rapid credit facility and how the World Bank also moved to help the preparedness in all of these countries. So I think that is necessary, and that has to be done with rapidity. And I can see that administrative mechanisms are being put in place to facilitate that. And we've had quite tremendous support with our mission chiefs, both from the World Bank and the IMF, which is great. Then for the next couple of weeks, when we come for the spring meetings, I'm really expecting that the debt relief issues would be done, and then find a means of the SDRs also helping to support the commercial debt that we have on the continent. But really, going forward now, Masood, is for us to think through a new architecture, global financial architecture, and take it as seriously as the post-World War. That clearly what we are seeing is without measure. To have America talk about losing 100, 200,000 people in one line is just shocking to me. And we can imagine what will happen on the continent. So yes, global financial architecture re-examined, the resilience in our economies and how best to ensure that education and health and skills building are done. The issue of digitization is just so important for everybody. And a really much greater focus on how Africa will transform to be more either export or import substitution, oriented, and to trade more with itself. I think in that you then begin to shield, all continents with some capacity to respond to these things. And I think for all of us to learn how deeply interconnected we are, and the need to look within our boundaries and understand that, bringing the stream up for everybody is important to avoid any level of chaos that could come up.
Yeah, and maybe just to end by saying that I think we will want to re-examine the global financial architecture. We will need to think about how to create a more effective system of global health security. There will be ways in which people will want to think about the nature of supply chains and interdependence across economies. And all of these will pose difficult trade-offs as we discuss these issues. And I guess my personal plea is that the process by which we re-examine all of these important global issues itself needs to be an inclusive process where the perspectives of the different groups of countries are adequately reflected in the design of the new architecture. One big difference from the period after the Second World War is that there are now many more countries that need to have a view on how to shape the future architecture, including all the countries in Africa. So I very much hope not only that we will focus on these issues, but that we will focus on them through a process that is itself reflective of the world we want to create, rather than the world from which we are coming. And I'm sure under your leadership, Ken, the Development Committee will be a great way in which you can help to move the discussion and the processes in that direction, if you agree with that.
I do, and I appreciate the effort. I mean, clearly after the spring meetings, I think we will need to hold some very serious pledge conferences in which support for the WHO will be important. The issue of countries and continents such as ours will be brought, and also for the World Bank and IMF to first appreciate their technical capacity on the development side and appreciate the UN's capacity on the humanitarian side, and somehow meld in a way in which policies, ensure that those are taken together and they work together much more. I think that the nature of globalization requires that we work more effectively between the humanitarian and the development, and I think we'll have more benign policies or policies that ensure that the idea of shared prosperity is realized.
And I know you're facing a huge challenge in dealing with the day-to-day unfolding of the crisis and the response to it in Ghana. And I wish you all the success and best of efforts in that regard. And I also want to express our support to you for the leadership that you're going to bring to the work of the Development Committee. Thank you for your time. And I hope that we will have an opportunity after the Development Committee meeting in a month or so to reconvene and see where do we think we need to go, because this whole situation is unfolding at a pace in which we need to keep monitoring and adapting our own strategies and responses in light of the developments. So thank you again for joining us.
Thank you very much, Masood. Really appreciate it.